Thank you for joining us again today on our Wonderful Day of the Lord broadcast. We're looking at the book of Hebrews this week and looking at some of the commands here, not all of them by any means. But the book of Hebrews is doctrinally rich. Perhaps only the book of Romans would be comparable as far as the depth of the systematic teaching of theology and truth that is found in this book. It's just filled with things. For many people, it's a difficult book for that reason. It's not a book that you skim as you read through it. It's a book you have to kind of take your time and consider the arguments that are being developed and what the writer is saying. But when we come toward the end of the epistle, he moves further away from the doctrinal sections, although doctrine and life is always interlaced. But he moves more towards application towards the end of the book, much like many of the epistles that do exactly that, have a doctrinally intense early portion followed by the application of those truths. So Hebrews does something very similar. And in after chapter 11, this beautiful chapter everybody knows about, I suppose, that teaches about the Old Testament saints who lived lives of faith. Following that, he moves immediately into chapter 12 and applying all that we've been learning through the first 11 chapters, and especially about chapter 11, and he moves on to a few commands that we want to look at. Verse 1, for example, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses, talking about chapter 11, we look back and we see these faithful people who live by faith in the Old Testament, not perfectly, by the way. If you know your Old Testament, and you know the people that are mentioned here, you know none of them lived perfect lives. They had feet of clay. Some of them pretty bad feet of clay. But nevertheless, they lived by faith, and that's pointed out here, this cloud of witnesses. So as we have surrounded by this cloud of witnesses, he says, laying aside every weight and sin which so easily entangles us. Now there's our commands. As we look to those who have lived faithfully in the past, and live by faith, we look to ourselves and we see the need to, and the command is given to, lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily entangles us. So there's a distinction here between the weight and the sin. The weights, I would take it, are perhaps not those things that are necessarily sinful, but these are things that slow us down, that hold us back, that keep us from being what God would have us be. He says, lay those aside. Don't be sidetracked by the things that don't matter. And also lay aside these sins that so easily entangles us. Now, we know sin is falling short of the mark. It's not living as God would have us live. It's falling short of the glory of God. So he says, identify those sins. And he says, those sins easily entangle us. How easy it is for us to be sidetracked and tempted and drawn aside by sinful behavior, sinful habits, and so forth. So we need to realize how these things entangle us. And as we lay those aside, we put the weights and the sins aside. Then he moves on to the next command, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So now we're going forward. We're laying aside the things that slow us down, and we're moving forward in this race of endurance that is set before us. So we get the idea of a track runner. And we've all seen that. If you've seen a sprinter, for example, at the Olympics, we watch that on TV, they are in very light clothing. They don't try to run with an overcoat and a hat and all these boots on. They have the lightweight clothing. They've laid aside all the things that would slow them down. And then they run the race that is set before them. But he goes to verse 2 and he says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. We need to know the goal line. We need to know the objective of our race. So we don't just run blindly. We don't just run this race haphazardly. We know the direction we want to go because our eyes are fixed on Jesus himself, who's in this picture here, is at the finish line. He is the author, the trailblazer is another word for that, and the perfecter of our faith. He's gone before us. Who for the joy set before him endured the cross. So he's done this for us and before us. And despising the shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. As Christ crossed the finish line, so to speak, he is also rewarded for the race that he ran. So we have this beautiful picture of what God would have us do as a picture of a track runner. laying aside the weights, running the race that is set before us, seeing the finish line up ahead, and receiving our reward as we get to the end of that line. Jesus has already done all this for us. He's already done it before us, and we have that example as well. So here is a wonderful set of commands in the race before us as Christians.